Disclaimer.
Hey, it's AG. Costco will happily sell you a coffin, a year's worth of mayonnaise, and enough toilet paper to survive the apocalypse. But 2 tubes of silver coins? Apparently, that's where they draw the line. Picture yourself walking into Costco last weekend. You're pushing that oversized cart past the rotisserie chickens, maybe grabbing a case of water, when you remember something you read online. Silver's been moving. Maybe it's time to pick up a few coins for the safe at home. You head over to the bullion section, find those familiar tubes of American silver eagles, and grab 2, just 2 tubes, nothing crazy. But when you get to the register, the cashier stops you mid-scan. "I'm sorry, sir, we can only sell you 1. You laugh, thinking she's joking. She's not. Costco, the same warehouse that will happily sell you 48 rolls of toilet paper and a pallet of bottled water, is now telling Americans they can only buy 1 tube of silver at a time. And here's what should really grab your attention. This isn't some local store policy. This is corporate, nationwide, implemented quietly while most of us were focused on other headlines. Now, if this were happening in isolation, maybe we could brush it off as inventory management. Retailers limit hot items all the time, right? But what makes this different is what happened just days earlier at the United States Mint. The same federal institution that's been striking silver eagles since 1986 announced something it hasn't done since 2015. Delays. Not the usual shipping lag you might expect around the holidays. We're talking about a formal announcement that 2026 Silver Eagles would face a minimum 1-month production delay before they even hit authorized dealers. Think about that for a second. Our own government mint, sitting on the largest silver reserves on the planet, is telling Americans to wait in line. And at the exact same moment, our largest retailer is telling us we can only buy 1 at a time. This is the first time in nearly a decade that a major American retailer and the federal mint have simultaneously restricted silver access during a price spike. And most people have no idea it's happening. And let me take you inside what's actually unfolding on the ground, because the Costco headlines are just the tip of this iceberg. I spent the last week calling coin dealers across the country, not the big online operations you see advertised everywhere. I'm talking about the local shops, the family-owned businesses that have been serving their communities for decades. The places where you used to walk in on a Tuesday afternoon, put cash on the counter, and walk out with a roll of silver eagles that same day. Those days are gone. A dealer in Texas told me he's now quoting 4 to 6 weeks for standard silver eagle tubes, products that sat in his display case as recently as October. A shop owner in Arizona said she's stopped taking orders for certain products entirely because she can't give customers an honest delivery estimate anymore. In Ohio, the 3rd-generation coin dealer described his current inventory situation with 1 word: unprecedented. But here's where it gets interesting. It's not just the wait times that have changed, it's the premiums. For those who aren't familiar with how physical silver works, let me break this down quickly. When you buy a silver eagle, you're not just paying for the silver content, you're paying a premium above the spot price. That premium covers minting costs, dealer margins, and market demand. In normal times, premiums on silver eagles run about $2 to $3 over spot, sometimes a bit higher around holidays or during modest price moves. 72 hours ago, those premiums jumped to $8 over spot. That's not a typo. We went from $3 premiums to $8 premiums in 3 days. And some dealers are reporting premiums even higher than that for immediate delivery. What this means in practical terms is that the paper price of silver and the real price of silver are diverging at a rate we haven't seen in years. If you want silver you can actually hold in your hand, you're paying a completely different price than what you see quoted on financial news networks. Now, I know what some of you might be thinking. Maybe this is just temporary. Maybe it's a supply chain hiccup. Maybe the holidays created a backlog that'll clear up in a few weeks. But here's what history tells us about moments exactly like this one. In the year 2000, a metal most Americans had never heard of called palladium started showing similar patterns. Retail access tightened, premiums expanded. Dealers started apologizing to longtime customers about wait times. Most people shrugged it off. On January 13th, while most Americans were starting their Monday morning routines, something extraordinary happened in the financial markets. The CME Group, the organization that runs the COMEX exchange where silver futures trade, pulled out a weapon they've used successfully for decades. They raised margin requirements. Specifically, they issued Notice 2601-9, hiking the margin on silver futures contracts from $32,500 to $38,250 per contract. That's a 15% increase overnight with no warning. Now, if you're not familiar with how this game works, let me explain why this matters. Margin is essentially the deposit you need to control a futures contract. When exchanges raise margin requirements suddenly, it forces leverage traders to either post more cash immediately or sell their positions. It's a financial pressure valve designed to cool off markets that are moving too fast. And historically, it's been devastatingly effective. Cast your mind back to 2011. Silver had run from $18 to nearly $50 an ounce. Retail investors were piling in. The momentum seemed unstoppable. Then the CME raised margins. Not once, not twice. 5 times in 8 days. The result was catastrophic for silver bulls. Prices crashed over 30% in a matter of weeks. Fortunes evaporated. The message was clear. Don't fight the exchange. For more than a decade, that playbook worked. Every time silver got frisky, margin hikes would knock it back down. Traders learned to fear these announcements. The mere threat of increased margins was often enough to trigger selling. So what happened on January 13th, 2025, when the CME deployed the same weapon? Silver dropped $2.43. That's it. A 2.8% dip. And within hours, it started climbing right back up. Think about that contrast for a moment. The same tactic that caused a 30% crash in 2011 barely registered a 3% hiccup in 2025. Something fundamental has changed in this market. And to understand what, we need to look 12 time zones to the east. While the CME was raising margins in Chicago, the Shanghai Gold Exchange closed trading with silver priced at $93.31 per ounce. At that exact moment, COMEX silver was trading at $83.90. Do the math. That's a $9.41 gap between what silver costs in China versus what it costs in the United States. In the world of commodities trading, a gap like this should be impossible. Arbitrage traders are supposed to eliminate these discrepancies almost instantly. If silver is cheaper in New York than Shanghai, traders buy in New York, ship to Shanghai, and pocket the difference. The process should equalize prices within hours, maybe days at most. But here's the thing, that's not happening. This gap has persisted and even widened. And the reason tells us everything about why the old playbook no longer works. What we're witnessing is a fundamental shift in who controls the silver market. For decades, Western exchanges set the price. COMEX was the center of gravity. Paper contracts, traded by speculators who never intended to take delivery of actual metal, determined what silver cost worldwide. Physical silver flowed wherever the paper price dictated. Shanghai has flipped that script entirely. When Chinese buyers see COMEX silver trading at $83, while their domestic price sits at $93, they don't see a pricing anomaly. They see a discount. Every time the CME raises margins and triggers a Western price drop, it creates an immediate buying opportunity for Eastern physical buyers. They step in, purchase metal at the artificially suppressed Western price, and drain it from COMEX vaults to satisfy demand in markets where the real price is almost $10 higher. The arbitrage is flowing in one direction only, out of America into Asia. This is why the margin hike failed. The CME can raise margins all they want. They can force Western speculators to sell their paper contracts. But every dollar the price drops in Chicago creates a wider gap with Shanghai, which triggers more physical buying, which accelerates the drain on Western inventories. They've turned their own weapon against themselves without even realizing it. Let me show you the proof. On the exact same day the CME announced their margin increase, COMEX registered inventory dropped by 400,000 ounces. Registered inventory, for those unfamiliar with the term, is the silver that's actually available for delivery against futures contracts. It's the real metal backing the paper promises. 400,000 ounces gone in a single day. On the same day, they tried to cool the market down. But that number only tells part of the story. Total COMEX silver withdrawals that day hit 2.2 million ounces. That includes both registered and eligible inventory. Metal flowing out of the system at a pace that would have been unthinkable just a few years ago. The financial weapon, designed to protect COMEX inventory, accelerated the bleed instead of stopping it. Here's what this means for regular Americans trying to understand what was happening to our money and our markets. The price you see quoted on financial news, the paper price determined by futures trading in Chicago, is becoming increasingly disconnected from reality. It's a fiction maintained by contracts that reference metal that's rapidly leaving the building. Shanghai's $93 price isn't arbitrary. It reflects actual supply and demand for physical silver in the world's largest manufacturing economy. Chinese solar panel factories, electronics manufacturers, and industrial users are competing for real metal. They don't care about paper contracts or margin requirements. They need silver to build things, and they're willing to pay what it actually costs to secure it. The $9 premium Shanghai commands over New York is the market's way of telling us which price is real and which is manipulated. And every day that gap persists, physical metal migrates from west to east. Some folks might wonder why this matters if you're not a commodities trader or a silver investor. Let me connect the dots to your daily life. When China controls the physical supply of a critical industrial metal, they control the industries that depend on it. Solar panels, electric vehicles, medical equipment, military technology, smartphones. Every sector that needs silver to function becomes subject to supply chains that flow through Shanghai, priced in yuan, on terms that benefit Chinese manufacturers and strategic interests. Our industrial base is watching its raw material supplies get arbitraged away in real time. And the traditional tools our exchanges use to manage these markets are making the problem worse, not better. The CME faces an impossible choice. Keep margins high and watch physical inventory drain to Asia. Lower margins and watch prices spike beyond their comfort zone. Every option leads to the same destination. It's just a question of how fast we get there. What happened on January 13th wasn't just a failed margin hike. It was a signal that the era of paper price control is ending. The Western financial system's ability to manage silver prices through futures market manipulation has been neutralized by a simple economic reality. Someone else is willing to pay more for the actual metal. China didn't win this war through military force or trade sanctions. They won it by accumulating physical supply while Western markets were distracted by paper games. And now that they've established price leadership, every attempt to suppress Western prices simply accelerates the transfer of real assets from our vaults to theirs. The paper war is over. The question now is, what happens when the physical reality catches up with the paper fiction? And that timeline is shorter than most people realize, because while traders argue about margin requirements and arbitrage spreads, a clock is ticking in boardrooms across America. Industrial buyers who need silver to keep their factories running are staring at inventory projections that don't add up. And when they're forced to act, the retail lockout we discussed earlier will look like a gentle preview of what's coming. There's a meeting that happened recently that didn't make headlines in any mainstream financial publication. No cable news coverage, no viral social media clips. But what was discussed in that room may have sealed the fate of the retail silver market as we know it. G7 Treasury officials gathered to address what they are now calling critical mineral security. And for the first time in history, silver appeared on that list. Not gold, not platinum, silver. The metal sitting in coin collections across America was formally designated alongside rare earths and lithium as a strategic resource requiring government-level coordination. Why does this matter? Because that designation opens a legal doorway that most Americans don't even know exists. It's called the Defense Production Act. Originally passed in 1950 during the Korean War, this legislation gives the federal government extraordinary powers to direct industrial resources during times of national need. It's been used sparingly over the decades, usually during genuine emergencies. But here's the critical detail. Once a material is classified as a critical mineral, the legal framework for prioritized allocation is already in place. What this means in plain English is that by March 2026, the government could legally mandate that available silver supplies go to military contractors and technology manufacturers before a single ounce reaches retail channels. Raytheon building missile guidance systems would get priority over your local coin dealer. Solar panel factories fulfilling government green energy contracts would jump the line ahead of Costco's bullion counter. This isn't speculation about what might happen someday. This is the legal architecture being assembled right now in real time, while most Americans are completely unaware. And the reason they're building this framework is because the people who run our industrial base are staring at numbers that terrify them. Let me walk you through the math that's keeping procurement officers up at night. We established earlier that Shanghai silver trades at $93 while COMEX sits near $84. We know that 2.2 million ounces flowed out of COMEX warehouses on a single day. Now let's look at what's left. COMEX registered inventory, the silver actually available for delivery, currently sits at approximately 123 million ounces. Sounds like a big number, right? But context is everything. Global industrial silver demand runs about 700 million ounces annually. Solar panel manufacturing alone consumes over 160 million ounces per year and growing rapidly. Electric vehicle production, medical devices, electronics, military applications, they all compete for the same shrinking pool. Now factor in the daily outflows we're witnessing. If 2.2 million ounces represents even a rough average of what's leaving COMEX warehouses, you can do the arithmetic yourself. That 123 million ounce registered inventory has a runway of roughly 55 days before it hits critically low levels. 55 days. That's not a year, that's not 6 months, that's less than 2 months before industrial buyers face a genuine supply emergency. But here's where sophisticated market observers are seeing something even more alarming. It's called backwardation, and it's flashing red in the silver futures market right now. In normal commodity markets, futures contracts for delivery further in the future trade at higher prices than contracts for immediate delivery. This makes intuitive sense. If you're storing silver for 6 months, you have carrying costs, insurance, warehouse fees, opportunity cost of capital. So the June contract should logically cost more than the January contract. When this relationship inverts, when near-term contracts trade higher than future contracts, it signals something profound. Traders are fighting to take delivery now rather than waiting. They're willing to pay a premium for immediate metal because they don't trust that metal will be available later. Silver futures are showing exactly this pattern. Market participants are clustered in the January delivery month, reluctant to roll their positions forward to March or beyond. In the language of commodities trading, they're saying loud and clear, we want the metal now because we're not confident it'll be there in 60 days. These aren't retail speculators making emotional decisions. These are institutional traders and commercial hedgers who make their living understanding supply dynamics. When they collectively refuse to trust metal availability 2 months out, it tells us something the official narrative isn't acknowledging. The clock is ticking toward Q1 deadlines that cannot be postponed. Samsung has semiconductor fabrication schedules that require silver. You can't tell a chip factory to pause production because the commodity markets are experiencing turbulence. Those facilities run around the clock, and their supply contracts are negotiated months in advance. Solar manufacturers racing to meet government installation targets need silver for photovoltaic cells. The Inflation Reduction Act created massive incentives for domestic solar production, and every company chasing those subsidies needs physical silver to fulfill their orders. Raytheon, Lockheed Martin, and other defense contractors building weapon systems for an increasingly unstable world require silver for electronics and specialized components. When the Pentagon places an order, delivery delays aren't acceptable. All of these buyers are looking at the same 55-day runway. All of them are calculating what happens when COMEX registered inventory drops below the threshold where their procurement teams can reliably source material. And all of them are reaching the same conclusion: secure supply now, whatever the cost, or face production shutdowns that would devastate their businesses and potentially compromise national security. This is the industrial cliff, the moment when manufacturing necessity overwhelms paper market games, when buyers who actually need silver stop caring about chart patterns and margin requirements and simply bid whatever price is necessary to keep their operations running. What does that price look like? Let's work through it logically. Shanghai has established a floor at $93. That's the minimum price Eastern buyers are willing to pay for physical metal. Any Western price below that simply triggers arbitrage flows that drain inventory faster. When American industrial buyers enter genuine competition for remaining supply, they won't be bidding against retail investors, or even against each other. They'll be bidding against Chinese manufacturers who've already demonstrated willingness to pay $93 and potentially much more. Something fundamental is shifting in the silver market, and you need to know about it. Industrial and military demand is creating a supply squeeze so tight it could lock retail buyers like you out of the market entirely. Think about it. Defense contractors and solar manufacturers have deadlines. They'll pay whatever it takes for silver and pass the cost on. This isn't a guess, it's a mathematical reality. Based on current inventory and outflow rates, we're looking at a 55-day clock. When that clock hits zero, the market changes for good. We're talking about a two-tier system. One price for industry, and another, much higher price for retail, if you can even find it. What you saw at Costco with purchase limits, that was the first warning shot. The window to act at current prices is closing fast. This isn't a 5-year trend. We're talking about weeks. Stay informed because what's coming will catch most people completely by surprise.